Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's school committee meeting. Jen, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our big order of business tonight is our public hearing on our budget, but we do have a few things that we need to get out of the way prior to starting that. So why don't we go with the consent agenda, minutes from February 8th, 2018, and oath to bills and payroll.
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. We need to do a joint appointment with the Board of Selectmen and the Town Moderator for our Neshoba Valley Tech High School representative of that school committee. Tim, do you want to come up and run the show for a few minutes?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you all. You probably recall that the district agreement with Neshoba Tech provides for one voting representative from the town of Littleton, and Charlie Ellis has been ably filling that role for the town for the past several years. His 3-year appointment is expiring, so we do need to make a reappointment. I understand the position was advertised. Charlie was the only applicant. The appointment is made by a nominating committee consisting of the school committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the town moderator. So there are 11 members of the nominating committee, so a quorum of 6 is necessary. I think we've got that here tonight. I don't know if we want to hear from Mr. Ellis briefly.
Does Mr.
I
Ellis
think
want
we
to be heard
can
from?
Be happy to.
do this
How
with
many
some...
re-ups is this for you? This is your third go-around on this?
Yes.
All right. Perfect. We appreciate it, Charlie. Charlie's an alumnus of Neshoba Valley Tech. We won't say when, but it was a while ago. He was on the school committee here in Littleton and then moved on to that role, and he's been a great advocate. I actually had lunch with him over there earlier this year. Mr. Clenchey and I went over there and had lunch with their superintendent. It was a terrific opportunity to hear what they're doing over there. Charlie was a passionate in advocating what that school has to offer, not only the students of Littleton, but there are services that the citizens of Littleton, if you want to get your oil changed or your car looked at, you can get that done. There's a lot of other things. And we're actively talking about some cross opportunities for students of ours going there to take classes that they offer that we don't, and maybe some of their kids coming back towards this direction for stuff that we do that maybe they don't do. So we appreciate it, Charlie, and we appreciate you stepping up again. I know you're actually headed out tonight over there, so we're going to get this done. So let's go ahead.
I'll make a motion to reappoint Charlie Ellis as the representative to Neshoba Tech.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Just make sure we reflect that the moderator, Mr. Goddard, said aye, Mr. DeCoste, Mr. Gervig, and Mr. Knox all agreed from the Board of Selectmen. Thank you, gentlemen.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for accommodating us at...
Yeah, no problem. Charlie, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlie.
The other thing that we need to do is we need to ratify a couple of contracts. The first that I would like to do is the contract with our biggest union partner, the Littleton Educators Association, which is our classroom teachers and other, but primarily the classroom teachers are the biggest bulk of that membership. We had a long but fruitful negotiation. Margie, do you want anything you want to?
I want to thank you. I'm glad we came to an agreement.
I am glad too.
I want to thank you, and I hope that we continue to be able to work together, both the union and the teachers and the school committee.
I see no reason why we can't. This one wasn't really any more arduous than some of the ones we've done in the past. It's just the way it goes. But we definitely got across the finish line, thank goodness. And we're ready to implement it and then take a break. And we'll circle back to it in a couple of years. So at this point, are there any other discussion anybody wants to have before a motion?
No, and then procedurally, Chuck will be
Yes,
voting.
Chuck
as
DeCoste here at the
yes.
Board of Selectmen. They have a vote on this contract as well, so he will be here representing the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. I move that the school committee vote to ratify the contract with the Littleton Educators Association effective from September 1st, 2017 to August 31st, 2020 as presented.
Second that.
Motion is made and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Mr. DeCoste said aye as well. All right.
She's breathing. I already signed it, so yes.
I'm signing it right now, Margie.
Okay.
I know you want it. All right. There you go. All right, I think now we are ready and on time. We can, actually it says 7:10. What time is it?
Thank you very much.
7:08. Hold on for a couple minutes. Actually, we can talk about real quickly.
Take the other contract.
Oh, yeah, sorry, forgot about the other contract. Yep.
So,
What's that?
let me just make sure I get the right contract name. So it's going to be almost the exact same motion, except this will be for the teacher's assistance contract. So I move that the school committee vote to ratify the contract with the teacher's assistants effective September 1st, 2017 to August 31st, 2020.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. So we got those done. Can we pass this down to Kelly? Here, thank you. Then the other piece of business we had at the top of the agenda before we go into the public hearing on the budget was our appointment. We have two appointments to the Finance Committee. We have one that's expiring. It's currently held by Betsy Bowling. We sent Betsy a notice of her appointment coming up, and that she and anyone else who is interested should forward a letter of interest and a resume to the school department. We need to receive that by March 23rd, 2018. I just did receive an email from Betsy today that she is choosing not to reapply for that position. We thank her for her service through 3 years on there. It's a significant commitment. There's a lot more to it when you get on the Finance Committee, whether you're appointed by the school committee or the Board of Selectmen. You're in for everything. You're not just in for the little piece of the pie that you ostensibly represent. That's not how it works. You're in for everything. It's a very busy committee. It's a very important committee, and we appreciate. Betsy was a very regular attendee to the meetings. She was quite prepared. She dove all the way in and figured out how it worked. And we appreciate, both from the school committee perspective and from the town, the amount of time and effort she put into that. But at this point, we will be looking for a new appointee. So that's out there. I think we've also put that out through the newspaper and things like that, correct, Kelly?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. All right. So that's taken care of. All right. Now we can go to budget presentation. I'm just going to go up to the podium. So, this is for the FY 2019 budget. This was put together through the work of the administrative team and the school committee, primarily the budget subcommittee, which this year was myself and Matt Hunt, working very closely with Dr. Clenchey and Steve Mark, and of course the principals and the other staff members of the administration team also contributed. As always, we want to remember that when we think about the budget, everything is designed to support our mission statement, to foster a community of learners who strive for excellence and prepare each student to be a successful contributing citizen in a global society. And of course, the values that we try to impart day by day throughout all of our grades. So, just a refresher on, what the timeline is and the process for putting this budget together. In October, the budget subcommittee started to meet with Dr. Clenchey and Steve Mark, and they worked with the administrative team to identify our initial budget priorities. In late December, January, we met with the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen for the initial introduction of the budget, both from the school committee and the rest of the town departments. Then through February and March, we met jointly with those committees, working on how to make the budget work for all departments, because there is a limited amount of resources. We're here to finalize the budget tonight and vote it per statute, with the goal of getting to town meeting and having town meeting support the school committee budget and the overall budget for the town. We identified our priorities for fiscal 2019. Some of them are things that we think about all the time, continuing to meet the learning needs of all our students, continuing to assess district programming. We want to make sure that we have a continued emphasis, which is something we've been talking about with more emphasis in the past couple of years, on social and emotional learning. And that's taken on even more priority in recent weeks due to the tragic events in Florida. And it's something we'll be discussing in more detail at our next meeting. We're also striving to maintain our current student-teacher ratios as we address the housing growth in Littleton and its potential impact on student enrollment. This is something that we've had extensive discussions about, and it's something we'll continue to focus in future budget cycles. And we continue to evaluate staffing for IEP team meeting. Again, we had a detailed presentation earlier this year on how the IE process works, and when we get to the budget here, obviously it's a big chunk of what we do in the budget, and something that we need to proactively address every time we work on the budget process. We're also looking at professional development, implementation of different curriculum and frameworks. One thing that we are thinking about, as always, is the implementation of facilities maintenance and repair. And in the budget discussions with the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen, it looks like that the town will be hiring a facilities director at some point next year. It might not be at the beginning of the fiscal year, might be halfway through or a little more. But the school committee will be participating in the process of defining the exact role for this person, and will definitely impact how we do facilities maintenance and repair on all of our buildings in town, including the schools. We talked a little bit about, we had Charlie here talking about Neshoba Valley Tech, and of course we're working on our partnership with Middlesex Community College, looking to find ways to creatively expand our offerings to our students while trying to keep things within the budget framework. So the budget components, we have our funding sources, which is primarily, the biggest chunk is the town appropriation, which is derived from net state aid and real estate taxes and other funding areas from the town. We have our circuit breaker, which is our reimbursement from the state that subsidizes our funding on special education, primarily our out-of-district tuition costs. While subsidizing those costs, it's also always important to remember that it certainly doesn't cover the costs of the out-of-district tuition in their entirety. We also have our school choice revolving account. We know we will be spending a certain amount of our school choice funding in this budget, and I expect quite a bit of our discussion tonight and debate will be exactly about how much we think we should spend out of this account and how much we feel we should be keeping in reserve. Our special purpose accounts are fees that we charge for things like busing, athletics and activities, cafeteria services, full-day kindergarten, and Tiger's Den. There's a significant amount of money that we use in the budget to support all of our different services, and some of it is derived from those types of fees. And we do have some grant money as well that we get from various sources. And all of those put together support the expenses that we incur through our different cost centers, which you see up there. And when we think about the cost centers, some of them are self-explanatory, regular education, or what we would consider all of the costs associated with our standard classroom and our buildings, special education. Student and staff support is a cost center that includes guidance, nursing, technology, curriculum, and professional development. The other instruction cost center includes co-curricular and extracurricular cost centers. It's primarily our coaches and staff that doesn't volunteer, they get a stipend for clubs and activities, and also for curriculum-based work that they do outside of the regular budget. The systems administration cost center, that's a superintendent's office and staff and school committee costs, which are very low because we don't get anything. School administration is the principals and office staff at each building. Transportation and buses is the regular and special education transportation costs, and facilities and maintenance is pretty self-explanatory. So working with the Budget Subcommittee going into the process and coming out with a list of priorities that we felt we needed to be able to fund through an increase primarily in the appropriated budget, we knew that our steps and lanes and our contract were going to cause an increase of around a little over $600,000. We anticipated out-of-district and case tuition costs to increase by about $168,000. Student transportation for regular education, our contract was up with our busing company. We put it out to bid, and then we got one bid back from D-Bus, who was our previous provider. They will be our provider again, but that cost of that contract is up $120,000 annually for the life of the contract, which is 5 years. We identified about $31,500 in increases for our operational costs. We felt, in terms of staffing, that we need a math specialist that we have had in the past at Shaker Lane and Russell Street. We need to put that position back in and fund it. We've talked multiple times through different budget cycles about adding a computer science instructor at the high school. And one thing, we added an assistant principal at the middle school last year, and the administration feels having an assistant principal at Shaker Lane is something they need to think about supporting. And of course, we had a lot of discussion last year about supporting tuition-free full-day kindergarten, and to continue supporting that phase-in over 5 years. We're in the second year of that plan. It would require $150,000 into the budget to support reducing the amount of tuition we charge to parents who send their children to full-day kindergarten. The total that we came up with is at $1.3 million, a little bit over that. Working with the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen, we were able to agree on an increase in the appropriated budget of $898,300 for a total of $19,774,190. We know that we have our projected balance in school choice, which we'll look at in more detail later, is about $1.6 million. We looking at our tuition and the way that the funding works for circuit breaker, and based on what we have been able to glean from what the state is projecting to reimburse us at, we know that we're projecting that we'll have $733,000 available in circuit breaker. And then we've also allocated, out of those other revolving funds and grants, about $2.3 million. With the increase of $898,000 in the appropriation, we're able to cover the following increases in our salaries and expenses in terms of what we would call level services. The $898,000 will keep our current staffing level, meet the bulk of what we had budgeted for sped and out-of-district tuition, continue to provide the same level of regular education busing in terms of the number of buses and the number of runs we have each day. And really, nothing in this list is additive to what we were already doing in terms of staffing or services, so that's why we would call that a level serviced budget. Below that is mostly what we would consider spending beyond level services, with the only exception being the amount of the sped tuition. When we looked at the budget for the sped case and out-of-district tuition, we evaluated our current caseload and associated costs, but we also put in contingency amounts for potential increases in tuition rates and/or the number of students that are placed in case or other out-of-district settings. Those contingency amounts totaled close to $150,000 when we did the original budget. By removing around $25,000 of that from the contingency from our level service request, we still have $125,000 of contingency in our line item for SPED, in that what we would call that level service budget amount. The remaining items on the list at the bottom there are the additional staffing that we're asking for, or at least considering, and again, supporting the phase-in for tuition-free full-day kindergarten. In some ways, it's reasonable to evaluate those as additive versus level services. And the amount that we of our original, of all the lists that we put there, that we aren't able to cover with the additional increase in the appropriated budget is $420,000. This slide shows a breakdown of our projected school choice funding, as well as some modeling of how school choice would be impacted by spending to support different budget priorities not met with the increased appropriation. Our current balance that we're projecting at the end of FY 2018 will be about a little over $1 million. We're projecting receipts of about $550,000. So the projected amount available for use as reserve or spending in FY 2019 is a little over $1.6 million. We know that we have already budgeted a salary offset to support our current staffing of $250,000. That is an amount that we've rolled forward year after year. We talked a little bit about the sped tuition contingency that's not covered in the increase in appropriation. The tuition-free full-day kindergarten amount that is required for this year would be $150,000, and then those 3 additional staffing positions are $245,000. If you decided in some way that you wanted to do all those, you see it rolling forward from $250,000 to $275,000 up to $670,000, and you can see the impact in the right-hand column on what our reserve would be left available in that account as we added those different items to the list. And if we funded everything, we would go down below $1 million, and even more importantly, in my mind anyway, we would be exceeding the amount that we're taking in this year. We're projected to take in around $550,000, but if we do everything, we're going to spend about $120,000 more than that. The scale at the bottom is just a way of showing what, if we decided that we couldn't do everything, but we wanted to do something, and I think what we're going to do is come back to this later on when we have our discussion. But again, we know that we're doing the annual salary offset. That's already in the budget. But just going down in increments of $75,000 of additional spending, if we start at $75,000, we would use a total of $325,000 and have $1.278 million left over. If we go all the way up to $300,000 beyond the salary offset, we would be spending a total of $550,000, which is what we project we're going to take in, and would leave us a balance of $1,053,000. And then you can see if we decided to go farther, we're going even further into the reserve. At this point, I would like to have Dr. Schcmte come up and just give some background on the positions that we're thinking about, in terms of priority, and what his, the administration's point of view about why those particular positions are on this list versus something that maybe other people would be thinking we're doing, and also what each of these means in relation to each other. So, Dr. Schcmte, you want to
Thank you.
do that?
Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everybody. In the past few years, we have been looking at what we call a required services budget. When we've added staff, it's usually a result of increased class sizes that we're responding to, or we have a critical mass of students that need further attention. For example, we added an ELL teacher because the number of ELL students in our district has increased. We added a Tier 4 special education teacher a couple of years ago because we had a critical mass of students that required Tier 4 services. Having said that, by offering that Tier 4 program, we saved hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and our philosophy is that we want to keep as many students within our district as possible. We want them in our community. The only time we look for out-of-district placements is if we don't have a critical mass to offer programming that is suitable to their needs. Every year, we have students that we send out of district. We bring back students, but every year we have students that move into our district that have increased needs beyond the capacity of our district. Costs range anywhere from $60,000 to over $200,000 per student. So when we're looking at our school choice reserves, those reserves are a buffer in case some of those things happen. And I use the phrase "in case." It happens every year. There hasn't been a year since I've been here where we haven't had unanticipated expenditures in terms of out-of-district costs. And of course, there are other unanticipated expenditures that happen throughout the year. Something as simple as, it's not simple, but having to shovel off our roofs because of the amount of snow that we have. A boiler may break down. Something else may break down that costs significant dollars. So those those school choice funds are essential, and a healthy balance is essential in order for us to function without fear of having to go to a town meeting in the fall and ask for more money. It's also imperative that you realize that when it comes to SPED law, if a child requires services outside of the district, that's the law, and we do not have a choice. We have to pay those costs no matter what. Now back to the three positions that we would like you to consider this evening. The first position is the instructional support specialist. And in 2011, just before I came here, we added, or the district added, a K-5 math science instructional support specialist. In FY 17 and 18, we found that our needs in terms of class size reduction and other staff to take care of students coming into our district had to take priority over that position. So we just did not rehire for the last 2 years with the intent of bringing this position back in FY 19. Around the same time, in 2015, we rearranged our tech department. We had our director of technology leave. And in doing so, we created an instructional technology coordinator position. With the reorganization of all our staff, we actually downsized the department by 1 full-time employee. So we were trying to, again, balance everything we could to continue to provide the necessary services to meet the needs of all of our students. Rationale and purpose of this position to support the Littleton Public School vision and strategic goals, providing the necessary leadership and expertise in math, science, and technology. Also to provide the necessary curricular and instructional program support. This position also would provide the necessary guidance in using technology effectively to assess student learning, differentiate instruction, and provide rigorous, relevant, and engaging learning experiences for all students. This position would also help create hands-on activities that teach 21st century skills, core skill set that our students need to be successful as they enter post-secondary education. 21st century skill sets include collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. Performance responsibilities provide guidance to utilize formative assessments such as MAP and MCAS, analyze that data to inform and differentiate instruction within the math and science classrooms K through 5, provide instructional leadership on everyday math and FOSS science programs. The FOSS is the science programs that we've implemented K through 5. It has required some realignment with the standards that have changed in the state of Massachusetts. Perform and demonstrate lessons in classrooms for observation by teachers. This allows us to help our teachers move forward, having a specialist in-house to take a look at the best and next practices, and also have a seamless integration of technology into our classroom. You can't separate technology in this day and age from curriculum development. They're one of the same thing. They have to be. Co-teach lessons with teachers to strengthen vertical alignment, curriculum alignment, and build capacity across grade levels. We've benefited greatly from this position in the past. We were able to do without this position for 2 years because we were retooling the curricula in those subject areas, and we were bringing in consultants to help us out in integrating the new curriculum standards. We're now ready to move forward with reinstating this position, if at all possible. The Shaker Lane Assistant Principal. Over the past number of years, we've had a sustained increase in enrollment. And we've also noticed that our student diversity in terms of learning needs has significantly increased in the past 3 years. We have placed a significant increased emphasis on social and emotional learning. Our social and emotional learning curriculum, to be effective, has to be embedded in all of the various subjects throughout our elementary programming. In order to do the right implementation strategy, we also need somebody to be able to monitor the implementation and evaluate how effective the social and emotional curriculum is actually being. At this point in time, our principal is inundated with management tasks. And every year as we look at how much time our administration puts in a management task or management role more correctly as opposed to leadership, I'm finding more of an imbalance. And the imbalance is more towards management than leadership. If you want to move your district forward and your schools forward, you need to have our administrators spend sufficient time within that leadership domain. If you don't, you remain in neutral. And I don't think we want to remain in neutral. We've had great success in moving our district forward. We've received state and national recognition, and our community does expect that of us, and rightly so. We want a system that pivots around excellence. And in order to do that, we need our administration spending as much time as possible within the leadership domain. Another component that we need to focus more on at Shaker Lane School and in all schools is the increased need for student interaction and support for social and emotional health. In order to help students overcome challenges in this area, we need people that have the time to spend with our students. An elementary, for Darrell, elementary, assistant principal, one of their primary functions would be to spend time with students and help them overcome challenges. And right now, this is an area that I see lacking at Shaker Lane School and Russell Street School as well. Educator evaluation, 5th year of the new state evaluation model. Quite a cumbersome process, but certainly there are a lot of gains to the process if it's implemented properly. At Shaker Lane School, we have 40 staff members, 40 teachers that are evaluated annually. Requires pre-conferences, frequent observations, post-conferences, formative and summative assessments. An assistant principal would provide more effective and consistent practices when evaluating staff. The key to helping staff become better at their craft is spending the time having those conversations that help them move forward, providing opportunities for professional development. It's called instructional coaching. And as you can see on the next page, I have a bullet that says ongoing school improvement initiatives require administrative leadership that focuses on instructional coaching and staff professional development. The current responsibilities placed on the school principal make it difficult to spend sufficient time within these domains. Providing sufficient supports for students struggling with social and emotional needs is considered a key pillar within safe and caring schools. We've been talking a lot about that every year, and we've been spending more time recently reviewing what we're doing in all of our schools and ensuring that our schools are safe and caring. 2 key words in that sentence are safe and caring. The addition of an assistant principal would provide additional support in this area. Other schools that have similar student populations and grade configurations have the support of assistant principals. The principalship has changed, and as a result of the increased demands on a principal's time, in order for a principal to be able to spend sufficient time in the leadership or instructional coaching domain, they need some help. And I've noticed it over the past 2 years especially, where when I'm sitting down with the principals, we talk about management versus leadership, and most of the time after I leave that meeting, I go away with a feeling that there's an increased void in that leadership domain. And that's concerning to me as an educational leader. The third position that we're talking about this evening is the computing science teacher. The majority of high schools in Mass offer some component of computing science program. There's a variety of ways to do it, but it has become common over the last 5-6 years. As I've said to Dr. Harrington, I'm not interested in a traditional hire for a computing science teacher. If this is going to do what we feel it needs to do, we need somebody with some industry experience. It has to go beyond the textbook. The Mass Department of Education developed computing science standards in 2016. They worked with educators in the state and also industry representatives to ensure that the standards are relevant to today's students. Very important sentence. And it is. I've looked at the curriculum, and I'm really pleased with what I see. Having access to computer science provides new ways of solving problems and introduces our students to valuable skills that they will need in today's economy. The standards for computing science contain 4 strands: computing in society, digital tools and collaboration, computer systems, and computational thinking. The addition of computing science would complement our STEM program and allow us to offer a program of studies that mirrors other outstanding high schools within the state of Massachusetts. We realize that we have limited resources. It's our duty to make sure that our budgets are affordable to the town, and I'm going to add the word sustainable as well. There's no sense moving forward with budgets that you cannot sustain. So I'm very cognizant of that, but at the same time, you can tell I'm a strong advocate for these positions. I feel that they would make a tremendous difference within our district. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation back to Chairman Fontanella.
All right, thank you, Dr. Clenchey. So this slide shows a projected spending plan. Again, working with the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen, we have tentatively agreed, subject to tonight's vote, to a total appropriation of $19,774,190. We know that we are going to, based on our projections, spend $733,000 in circuit breaker. We've also already budgeted the use of our fees and grants and other revolving funds for $2.3 million. The school choice amount that I put up there is really for modeling purposes. We have to put something in there. We know we're going to spend some amount, and in order to support the slides that we're going to see subsequent to this one, we put the amount that we're going to receive this year. We will have a debate and determine exactly what we want to spend out of that. But just for the modeling purposes, that brings a total FY 2019 total spending up to $23,361,750. This slide shows how we would break down the increase in appropriation between salaries and expenses. Again, we know that we had about a $604,000 increase in our salaries, as well as $294,000 in expenses. The salaries is about a 4.3% increase from fiscal year 2018, and the expenses are about a 6.1% increase. It's important to keep in mind that of that $294,000 for expenses, $120,000 of it is for the new school busing contract, which is 41% of that total. Without that increase, his expenses would be up 3.6%, which is more what we're used to seeing year by year. But because we have every 5th year, we have that bump in the transportation contract, it's a little bit higher this year than it would otherwise be. And we would expect in subsequent years during the course of the busing contract that number would go down towards 3%. Again, assuming that we don't have any particular volatility in other areas, specifically in SPED. So this slide shows how the funds are budgeted across our cost centers. It's a little rough to see up there, but you guys have copies on your computer screens.
That is an eye strainer.
Sorry about that, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it looked okay on my computer. I could read it.
That's good on mine.
As usual, the bulk of the funding is directed to classroom instruction and special education. This slide, same color scheme, shows the increases from FY 2019 to 18, both in the appropriated and revolving funds. For the appropriated budget, the total increase of 4.76% is a spread across the various cost centers with typical increases of just over 3% to just over 5%. There's a larger jump in the school administration line, mostly due to the addition of the assistant principal at the middle school last year. You can also see the transportation cost center is up 11% due to that new busing contract. For the revolving fund budgets, we are budgeting an increase of about 3.35%, although keeping in mind that we still have not made a final decision on school choice. Also keep in mind that we typically budget some of these funds on a fairly conservative basis. For instance, we currently have budgeted a decrease of $20,000 in the revolving spending for transportation. This is based on the bus fees. You know, depending on how many students sign up to pay the bus fee and take the bus, this amount, we'll use however many dollars we take in bus fees, that's what we'll spend. But we don't want to budget more than we think we're going to have, so we're a little bit conservative on that. And again, Tiger's Den, there's a decrease there, but we just don't know exactly how many students are going to sign up. And again, if they sign up and we have more kids showing up, we'll have more revenue to spend, and we would do more staffing and programming there in that cost center. So this chart, this is the second year we're showing this. It visually breaks out how much of the appropriated budget each cost center represents. Obviously, the bulk is on regular education and special ed. The rest of the cost centers typically account for between 5 to 7% of the appropriated budget, with other instruction, which is our coaches and teachers who volunteer to help out our clubs, a little bit lower. This slide combines regular and special education into one block of spending categorized as classroom spending, by which we mean costs that are directly associated with student instruction compared to the other cost centers which support but aren't directly related to student instruction. And the ratio here is 69% of our appropriated budget goes towards classroom spending, with 31% going to support that. And this is the second year we've done this. I looked at last year's presentation. These are the exact same ratios that we had last year. This chart is similar but combines the appropriated budget with our revolving fund spending. Tiger's Den is represented here but wasn't on the previous charts, as there was no spending from the appropriated budget on Tiger's Den, and it's fully supported by the tuition we charge and run through the revolving account. And again, other than Tiger's Den and other instruction, the other cost centers account for typically between 5 and 7% of the budget for each of them. Again, this just combines classroom spending and compares it to the other cost centers. And here, the ratio just dips a little bit at 68 to 32%, but again, it's exactly what it was in FY 2018. This chart shows the growth in the appropriated, revolving, and total budget year by year from 2012 up to what we're proposing to spend in 2019. Looking at this in more detail today, it's difficult to draw conclusions about the revolving spending as it varies year by year for different reasons. For instance, the reimbursement rate for circuit breaker has fluctuated between 72 and 65% in recent years, which can make a significant difference in the amount we have available to spend. And again, as noted earlier, some of our revolving accounts are dependent on enrollment, like things like Tiger's Den and busing and athletics, so that can fluctuate from year to year. However, it is easier to draw conclusions on the appropriated budget. Overall, we were up an average of 4% a year over this period. This year, we're up, or actually for the last 3 years, we've been up closer to 4.5%. This is due in large part to significant tax growth due to new commercial and residential development, and we've seen increased spending on our budget and also on the town side as we take advantage of having a larger revenue stream. In our meetings with FinCom and the Board of Selectmen this winter, we all agreed that the following years may very well see a little bit of a significant slowdown in that type of revenue growth, which is something that we're all going to have to contend with as we move the budget cycles forward. Both ourselves and the town side. This chart shows the gap between the state average and per pupil expenditure compared to what we spend per pupil here in Littleton. The gap has narrowed from a high of 9.3% in 2013 to 5.2% this year. However, with close to 1,600 students, that gap still at 5.2% represents $1.3 million in funding if we were spending at the state average. I think the point here to take away is that, you know, our student, staff, and administration are doing a great job of achieving at a high level. We talk about it all the time, using the resources that we are able to provide. This slide shows our current enrollment for this year and how it will roll forward next year. We have one class, the current combination of kindergarten and transition classrooms that will be grade 1 next year, that have over 140 students. 3 other classes have over 130 students. 3 more have over 120. There are 4 classes with 115 plus and 2 classes with 110 plus. There's a lot of information on this slide. The top shows the raw data of enrollment over the past 6 years. The middle chart is our by building and in total of resident students only, no school choice. And then the bottom chart is residents plus school choice added in. And you can see that the trend is clearly rising, which we've been aware of and have been striving to address for the past several years, primarily through additional staffing. Obviously, if this trend continues, there will be continued pressure on staffing and conceivably eventually on physical capacity, both of which are significant in terms of future budgets and spending requirements. In the lower chart, we can see that our school choice numbers over these years have been between 73 and 90 in past years. One strategy would be to meet the rising enrollment in resident students is to reduce the number of school choice students we have. But again, we have to remember that that would have a significant budget impact depending on how far we reduce that number. This chart shows student enrollment, both this is combined, resident and school choice by building. While overall enrollment is at its highest point in 6 years, we are actually slightly below each building's highest enrollment in the past 6 years. For instance, at the high school, we are below our high of the past 6 years by 8 students. At the middle school, we were below our high enrollment in that building by 10 students. At Russell Street, we're very close, really only down 1 student from the previous high. And at Shaker Lane, we're very close, also only down 3 students from the previous high. So even though we are facing increased enrollment, there's no question that that has been occurring. And the associated budget challenges in terms of staffing that we've had to face with that, we really are not in uncharted territory on a building-by-building basis. The number of students we have in the buildings we have had in the past several years. And again, while student enrollment is something we always have an eye on, we have been analyzing and discussing it with more emphasis the last couple of years, and we'll continue to monitor it more closely as we see. We did a deeper dive into that earlier this year, and we looked at a study that was done by a nonprofit that does that type of stuff. And the overall trend for school-age children is to go down, just based on demographics. So we'll see what happens here in Littleton over the next few years in that, and it is something that we definitely are paying close attention to because of the impact that it can have on our budget primarily. As always, we think we have a pretty good budget. We'll finalize it in a little while, but regardless of the fact that we're comfortable, we do have concerns. The biggest concern that we keep cycling back to year after year is level funding of local aid dollars. The state is not meeting their obligation, in my mind at least, in terms of our expenses are going up each year, and their contribution to that is not. And there's just no way Littleton or any other community in the Commonwealth will be able to survive that. At some point, something's going to give. In some districts and some communities, it's already giving. There was a terrible budget situation in Leominster last year, right down the street, that resulted in significant layoffs and cuts to public education. And that's the kind of thing I think is going to continue to be something we need to keep an eye on if that level funding and local aid dollars continues. We always are worried about out-of-district placement and tuition. As Dr. Clenchey said, when it happens, we have to deal with it. We really have no choice, and we don't expect to have a choice on it. But based on the funding formula and the level funding of local aid, it is incumbent on us to deal with it as a town, and it can be very difficult. We've talked about the new development and housing growth here in Littleton. The presentation we did that showed what that nonprofit had looked at, the housing growth isn't necessarily a predictor of increased enrollment, but there are factors in your community that are. Do you have good schools? Yes, we do. Are you close to Boston with mass transit? Yes, we are. Do you have amenities in town that people want to take advantage of? It looks like we have more than we ever have had before. So there is reason to believe that people will move here because it is a desirable place to live and raise your children. So that is going to have a potential impact on classroom space, transportation, sped, and all the other things that we think about in our budget. We will have a robust discussion in a few minutes on our continuing reliance on revolving funds. We are striving to make sure that our contractual and non-contractual salaries keep pace with market trends so that we can attract and retain the best educators and administrators. Increased costs associated with extracurricular and co-curricular programming. We have not raised our fees, and I don't think there's any appetite here to do so, but those costs are going up. We talk about the town appropriation support for structural increases. By that we mean we know that our salaries are going to go up year after year. If they're going up faster than the pace of the revenue stream that goes up in town, that's going to be a problem. and something that needs to be addressed. And again, our ability to maintain school choice seats and the associated revenue, while at the same time making sure that we're not having a negative impact on the delivery of educational services to our residents and those students. At this point, I would like to invite Dr. Clench up again to talk about, we do have a strong budget. I think we've done well, maybe not as well as we always think we can do or would like to do, but as much as we can do. And now we're going to have a little talk about what the benefit of having that budget is.
It's always a pleasure to be able to have an opportunity to talk about our successes from year to year, and this isn't new to you. You've already had a presentation at a previous school committee meeting. All of our accomplishments are tied directly into our Vision 2020 plan with the 5 standards that we have, and so they should be. Education plan or vision plan should really guide us in terms of where we're headed as a district. And as I go into this, there's one thing I wanted to mention about the 3 positions that we would like you to consider this evening, is all of those positions tie directly into the strategic plan. The integration specialist directly would coincide with standards 1, 2, and 3. Standard 1 is curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Standard 2 is professional development. I'm sorry, and standard 5 it should be, which is technology. So 3 out of the 5 standards. The assistant principal, it's applicable to all 5 standards, but with greater emphasis on standards 1, 2, and 3, curriculum, instruction, and assessment, professional development, and culture, school culture and climate. The computing science position would be directly correlated with standard 1, CIA, we'll abbreviate it now, and technology, standard 5. So when we look at the accomplishments, we're starting with the elementary schools, K-5, we wanted to group them, and because those schools should be headed in a very similar direction. Curriculum instruction and assessment, implementation of our science curriculum called FOSS, Full Option Science Systems, aligned with the 2016 Massachusetts frameworks. Implementation of Dreambox math program. This is such a cool program. It's an adaptive program for our students, and it stretches their thinking, makes math even funner than it already is. And we're just actually unraveling this now, and I just can't believe the tweets I'm getting from teachers, and they're so thrilled that we were able to move forward with this program. That's a K-5 program. It is applicable to kindergarten through grade 8, but we wanted to try K-5 and see how it works. Implementation of Fontes and Pinnell benchmark reading assessment systems in K-2. Incorporation of a dedicated writing block daily at Russell Street School. I'm thrilled about that. Creation of grade level writing rubrics, K-2. It's important to have rubrics so that all teachers are using similar standards to evaluate writing. Implementations of a standard-based report card, K-2. We now have a K-5 standards-based report card, which is a long time coming. Professional development, we have been very successful in having school-based professional development teams. About half of our professional development is school-specific, the other half is district-tailored. Some of the PD that we've been providing for staff, K-5, would be continued inclusion practices and co-teaching models. Executive functioning skills and behaviors. That has been an incredible addition to our PD program. I don't know if you remember me talking about the in-service we had, and the next day teachers were implementing what they learned in that session into their classrooms. That was a session on executive functioning. Technology integration, K-5, based on the ISTE standards, which stands for International Society for Technology in Education. Culture climate, continued implementation of the ALICE Emergency Response Program, K-5. We never let that go. People need to understand all aspects of the ALICE program. Installation of a new outdoor classroom area at Russell Street School. They were using it in December this year. few times. I was amazed. It was kind of cold out there. They're still out there using that outdoor space. Continuation of expanded extracurricular and co-curricular club programs at Russell Street, far more specialized as time goes on. Monthly school-wide meetings showcasing student performances and presentations at Russell Street School. One of our tech staff had an undiscovered talent to the point where he was invited back twice. Nobody knew that he was a gifted guitar player and singer. And we were all in awe when he started singing. We had no idea. Continued participation in Global Read Aloud and Global Play Day, both very important initiatives. Community and communication, partnership with Littleton Cable TV. There should be a program that was launched today. I sent you a tweet this weekend about one of our teachers, Mrs. McGregor, partnering up with a school in Spain, and they were doing a book review in Spanish, and then the school is going to be doing some other book reviews, and they're going to converse back and forth. That is such a cool global connection. And they're using something called Flipgrid. The LHS Shaker Lane Mentor Program, that is just an incredible program, having our high school students come down in K2 and working with our students. That's exactly what we want in terms of inter-school cooperation and collaboration. A continuation of the Buddy program with Littleton Council on Aging, K-2. It's also a very powerful program. We are also focusing more on our grade 2 and 3 teachers working together to transition as students go into grade 3. I'm excited to see the differences that this will make as time goes on. Technology, creation of grade level teacher technology leadership teams, K-5. That has made a tremendous difference in helping integrate technology into lessons within our classroom. We've also created a digital citizenship program, K-5, which is necessary and part of the 21st century skill sets. Continued emphasis on integration of technology, both into instructional and assessment practices. And the Russell Street think tank, Makerspace, second year of operation. They do incredible things in this think tank. If you ever have a chance to stop by Russell Street School, maybe check to make sure you have some classes in the Makerspace room. It's incredible what they do. I am so proud of that space. We just opened up a Makerspace at the middle school, and we just applied for a grant with LELWD for opening up a Makerspace at Shaker Lane as well. So we're hoping to obtain some funding for that. Middle school accomplishments under CIA, ongoing alignment and vertical articulation of curriculum mapping. We started curriculum maps 5 years ago, and it's really nice to have computerized references to what's happening in all of our classrooms. They're all accessible, and for principals, teachers, superintendent, it's nice to be able to go in and see exactly what's happening in terms of long-range planning. Research best practices, implementation and strategies related to meeting the needs of struggling and advanced learners. Development and implementation of 2 interdisciplinary units. The 2 projects per grade level, music to my ears. You know I'm a big fan of project-based learning, and to see it actualized is exactly what I like to see. And it's not just the middle school, it's happening in all 4 of our schools. Professional development, our site-based professional development teams continue to move forward. We have groups of teachers working on goals, common goals, and going to PD together. Whenever you have that critical mass, you can be assured that something positive is going to happen in the classroom. And it's not one-shot professional development. Dr. Jamie and I have had many conversations in regard to what meaningful professional development is, and it's not having somebody come in once and then never seeing them again. And we've become far better at making sure that doesn't happen. Continued implementation of the literacy lab, math lab, implementation of the academic support center. Both those programs have made a significant difference with student learning at the middle school. PD, curriculum review and design, inclusionary practices and co-teaching models, executive functioning skills, behaviors, requirement of mandated SEI, sheltered English immersion endorsement. That is a requirement for recertification for teachers and administrators and the superintendent. I'm actually in the middle of the course right now. And lots of time spent on technology integration as well. Culture climate, Alice again has mentioned, advisory model, the analysis and implementation of planning in regard to the Arbus survey. We have a very well-developed Veterans Day program. I'm always proud every year to attend that day or afternoon more correctly. It's a great activity for both our students and the community. Signs of suicide screening, SOS training. We also have addiction screening as well, which was mandated this year by the state. Community communication. We use Aspen Family Portal more and more to transmit information to our students and parents. We've revised our grade 6 orientation evening, and that's important. Whenever we talk about transition from school to school, I don't think you can do enough transition. The more you can think out of the box and be creative, the easier the transition will be for our students. Technology. Again, you're familiar with all these. I've already mentioned most of them, so we'll just move on to the high school. CIA, vertical articulation, curriculum maps. Our partnership with Middlesex Community College, offering dual enrollment courses, Latin, Spanish, statistics, and engineering this year. What I'd really like to see happen is an expanded partnership where our students are offering, or more correctly, taking part in an online course or a blended program with Middlesex. I think there's an untapped resource that we really need to continue to work at there. College essay conference process with the English department, that's worked really well. Another exciting venture, the Littleton High School Pin of Biliteracy. That's something new, and it's offered to seniors who've successfully completed 4 years of foreign language at the high school level. Continuum of services for students with disabilities who need substantially separate programs. That program is continuing to evolve with time. PD, very similar to the middle school, with the exception of our one-on-one Chromebook program, BYOD 4. That's actually worked out really well. Teaming with Air Shirley and Harvard this year with our high school staff made a tremendous difference in sharing resources and helping our teachers find ways or discover ways to use technology in their classrooms in a meaningful way. Climate culture, I've already talked, it's very similar to the middle school. Best Buddies program last Friday night. I was thrilled to be able to attend the middle school and high school Best Buddies talent show. It was incredible. I don't like to say this publicly, but I won't disclose the name of the teacher who was sitting in front of me, but both her and I had a number of times throughout the evening where we were tearing up a little bit, because we know these students, and we see where they've come since they've been with us, and it's just incredible how they've blossomed and grown. We did take part in the National School Climate Survey, both the middle school and the high school. I'm anxious to get both principals up here to do a summary of emerging themes from that survey. I'd like to do that obviously before the end of the year. Community communication, our CPR AED program is alive and well. I'm such a firm believer in that program for both students and teachers. I believe that everybody should have certification and make sure they recertify. Our Library Media Center, with the help of the M.H. Kimball Fund, has been transformed. We've successfully been the grant recipient of more money from the Kimball Fund for next year, and we'll continue to move forward with transforming our library. LCTV with our studio production course. It's the third year, I believe, now, and it's going well. What a great experience for our students to be able to be in front of a camera and learn all the aspects of what's required to put on a news program. Tried to make that as short as possible. And thank you, both Chairman Fontenelle and I I'd like to extend our thanks to our community for their ongoing support of our school budget. There are many groups in town, many businesses and other organizations that help in a significant way to continue to allow us to be as successful as possible. Without their support, our schools would look very different. So thank you to all of those entities and people that help us out every year. Do you want me to go back to the slide?
Yes, can we go to, I think it's 13, the school choice account slide. We can move around as we need to. I think that's going to, thank you.
Do you want me to just give you this?
Yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so this is our public budget hearing. At some point, we need to entertain a motion about what we think is the appropriate course of action in terms of supporting a budget. Open to debate at the moment.
Do you mind if I ask a few questions?
Go ahead.
There. These will be
Want
directed
me to
to
stand
you.
up there or sit
Yes,
down?
of course. No. No.
No, we'll get the microphone right above you, Ken, you can say.
All right.
That's fine. So I'd like to maybe just talk about the three positions for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, Chairman. Kelly, on the, I could make sure I get the names, the K-5 STEM support specialist.
Mm-hmm.
So we've received several presentations over the last, over the year here, and I think I've come back a couple of times talking about the grade 3-4 math, science pieces, discrepancies in terms of where testing is versus where we think our students are versus the state standards. Is this position going to help us? And also make sure I tie these to some concerns that we've had with where our students are.
Most definitely. And I actually have a meeting next week with the grade 3 teachers. I want to sit down personally with them and talk about the grade 3 curriculum. But when we're looking at math science achievement or achievement of any subject area, you can't just isolate the grade, as we all know. You have to go back. And it was the first administration of an exam that, in my opinion and in the opinion of the grade 3 teachers, was certainly stretching the application component for students in grade 3. I really believe that this position will help our teachers employ instructional strategies that are going to hit that top level of application, and also bring them together using more unified approaches to instruction and assessment. I mean, it's really a coach with the technology background, and I have seen this position make tremendous differences in schools, and I'm convinced with the right person, and we won't hire if we don't have the right person. I mean, you know me well enough that I haven't hired in the past unless we have the perfect person. I'm convinced that this will make a tremendous difference at the two schools.
Then my next one is, given that STEM and computer science is near and dear to me, but I don't want to just put my personal preference on this, but I also get a sense from a lot of people in the community that us lacking a computer science element of our instruction is pretty important to a lot of parents. Do we have a feel for how many of our students pursue either into the STEM areas into college, and in particular into computer science? And are we not servicing them well by not having a little bit more preparatory material for them entering those fields of study?
I'm going to ask John to...
Yeah, we did there was a recent survey, I think, done by, it might have been Science Department, Guidance Department, and I think it said, on they inventoried graduating seniors, 35, it might have been as high as 40% are going into the STEM field.
Do we know
Based on
particularly?
That's a recent graduating cohort.
You know how many in particular going into computer science, or you don't have?
But I know just anecdotally, it's a fair amount. I know I just talked to Dan Hogan, probably text him and he gave me a number, just, the kids he knows, he's influenced there. Without question, you know, there's a number of kids every year going into either a computer science or a computer-related field.
Right.
Particularly with gaming and animation design. There's a program at nearby college in England that's become really popular and known for that. It's a small, primarily known as a liberal arts school, but they have finally developed a niche for this and attracted a lot of kids. And so I think we could easily get that information for you, but it's a significant number of kids that are going into STEM. And it's heavily promoted, you know, by employers, and by, you know, parents as well in our community. We have a lot of parents, I just know anecdotally, who are in the STEM fields and working for nearby corporations that specialize in that, we're among them. And then there, you know, if you look at our college college admissions list, you see a lot of kids going on to technical schools or schools that are known for the STEM fields, whether it be WPI, RIT, and Carnegie Mellon. And Pitt has a strong program, so I know we could easily get this information from you, but it's quite high. Number of kids, lots and lots of interest. In fact, we went through this whole, when we had if you remember from an earlier discussion, I think it was in September or August or in the fall, we were coming before the committee to talk about what we're going to do to troubleshoot the problem with computer science, because we had a late departure of a teacher. He left in August, pretty much July, or end of July, and we needed to quickly rally to figure out what we're going to do and get a qualified applicant. A number of people in the community were willing to step up and fill that position, but we were able to accommodate students via virtual high school and other online learning opportunities. And so we'd like to see more growth in dual enrollment. But I know just from talking with students and guidance counselors and parents that there's a lot of interest in this field. I don't think it's, if we don't get it this year, this upcoming year, I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how Littleton High School will adopt a really strong computer science program. It's a glaring omission at our program in studies. It has been for a long time, especially where the schools surrounding us that have had it for 15 to 20 years. So it's something, we've offset that. We have accommodated students since we lost our computer science teacher. But I just think at some point, it's not this year, it's the year after, we should add some type of advanced program. I know the superintendent has a lot of suggestions for how to go around this, to do it in a novel way. If you look at our student population, we have, our student enrollment, we'd probably have to start even by gradually building it up. I mean, we'd have to have a really interesting candidate for the position, because I imagine that we'd have a beginner course, an intermediate course, and an advanced course. That's how we were trying to do it before. Past person who was in the position did part-time computer science and part-time math. And we would imagine that the hire, if it was a full-time hire, might be part-time computer science to begin with, and then gradually build. If we got a really interesting candidate who could do all kinds of novel things, perhaps with gaming and animation, we could really develop an advanced program to begin with. But we're not sure we're going to get as far as applicants. There's so many high-paying jobs in the computer science field. We know that it's going to be challenging for us to hire that talented person, that perfect person that we want, but we'll try to get close to it as possible. If it doesn't happen this year, we're optimistic we'll be right back at it and rallying and lobbying for it the following year.
Very well put, John. Darrell, I mean, we talk to parents, we talk to students, and with my next statement, I'm not going to guarantee that it's 100% accurate. I can only go from perception. I don't feel at this point in time, especially in this day and age, that our kids have been disadvantaged. Do I think this is something we need to seriously consider as we move forward? Yes. But I'm also going to make the statement, and I've said this many, many times, there are limits to what our schools can do. There are limits to what our high school can do. And the old way of doing business is if you want to add a program, you just add a teacher, is not applicable in this day and age, because our kids need so many different skill sets, or access to so many different skill sets. And as John and I have had many conversations, there's some exciting possibilities here. I really like what Dr. Harrington did this year in broadening the course offerings for our juniors and seniors. I think they gained a lot from being able to make some choices. I would like to see that increase. We talk about internship. We haven't talked about it tonight, but that needs to be part of the bigger discussion as well. Our students can learn so much from being placed in an internship program and exploring something that they may want to do. There's a couple of districts in our surrounding area that have well-developed internship programs, and I've asked John and Keith to start learning from these people to see what they're doing for their, to have a successful recipe. These people are not going to be easy to find and easy to hire because of the money factor in terms of private industry. And as I said before when I was talking about this position, I am not interested in a textbook approach to computing science. It has to go beyond that. I'm hoping when Dr. Harrington sits down with the Neshoba principal and superintendent, they have a well-developed computing science program there. And in an ideal world, I would like to see some of our students have access to that program and other programs that they're specialized in. One of the things that continues to bother me as an educational leader is technical voc schools should be, some of the programs should be accessible to all students, not a select number of students. That's the way the job market is going. How to do that isn't easy, but I think striking that partnership is the first stage of trying to blend what we could do. Neshoba Valley Tech has also shown interest in terms of a reciprocation agreement accessing our world language program because we have such a strong world language program. So there's some exciting things that happen. Middlesex College, I mean, there are people that are in the industry that are teaching. If we could tap their talents and have a blended program, we may be finding that there isn't one individual, but there's multiple individuals out there that may meet our program needs. So I want to move forward cautiously. I know too well what happens if we move forward too fast. We miss other opportunities if we're not careful. So am I an advocate of having computing science at our high school? You bet I am. I just want to make sure that we do it right the first time.
So I guess where I'm going with it is I don't want to use the budget to direct you to do a specific program. I guess based on what I hear in terms of where our students are positioning themselves for college and career, having a strong computers, having some fundamentals of computer science is an important part. I would like to see a priority placed on how are we going to develop such a program that we can support within our district. If it requires a hire, then you tell us it requires a hire to do that, or if it requires a different approach, I guess I'd like to hear that so that we can make sure that, I guess as a priority to me, how we get computer science into our course of studies is important. And I think based on where our students are going, having those foundations are important. So like I said, I don't want to say, well, I want to prove this because this is important to me, and here's whatever X dollars to hire a teacher for a specific purpose. I don't think is how I want to do policy. That's not really where my perspective of doing this.
I agree with that too, because as someone who's been in the computer science realm for a long time compared to, it's such an evolutionary career path anyway, that I worry about saying we're going to hire a computer science instructor. That's not going to do anybody any good. It's not going to do enough kids enough good to think about it like that. Because we heard about, it's a broad definition in terms of curriculum, computer science. You've got the programming aspect, graphics and animation, data analytics, social media. No one person is going to be able to do that. It has to be a broad-based application of various concepts so that as many kids as possible, as many students as possible, get a piece of what they think they might want as they lead out into where they're really going to learn how to do that stuff, which is in higher education, but also in the workplace. Because when you're in that environment, you can't stop learning. You'll be out of a job very quickly. So I appreciate what you're saying in terms of, we think it's important. You've told us it's important. That's why we're telling you right back. We're echoing it back. You've told us And the question is not, do we authorize it or do we support it? It's what's the best way to execute on it.
That was my, so I've got some, if you don't mind, Darryl,
Yeah,
I'll jump
go ahead.
in while we're talking about this position. So I had some introductory budget comments that I'll come back to. But I had the same concern, which is, I don't want to be in the business, like Darryl said, of prescribing precisely how the resources we allocate get expended by you. But I do have this same question that I wonder, like everything you just said makes me worried about allocating money specifically for this role, because it seems like both there's some uncertainty about whether we'll be able to find the candidate that we're looking for, but then also whether or not that candidate that we're looking for actually fits what the best plan would be for computer science, if that makes sense. So like, even if we find the ideal candidate, is that the best way to handle? And so I assume that this is a very high priority for me, that the computer science program gets developed. So I'll leave it with that. And I'm comfortable allocating resources in such a way that allows us to do that. But it's important to me that we explore some of these other things, because just like Mike said about how inherently a moving target the computer science field is, I don't want us to get stuck in an archaic way of doing the computer science program, which means like hiring a person. And because everything you just said is also very important to me. So the collaborations with our voc tech schools, which are being beefed up in their role as like this transition between high school and college and career, and then also these partnerships that we have with people who, like an adjunct professor at one of our local colleges is going to be an industry professional, and then also be someone who can be more nimble as to what types of courses they have. So this is a long-winded way of saying that my priority here is I'm glad that this is my fourth budget that I've been a part of, and computer science has been a big effort in a lot of those budgets. So I'm comfortable finding a way that we can allocate the resources that will let us do that. If we find that we have the right perfect candidate, then I think it makes sense to do that. But I also know, I guess I'm stating this more for the public, we know that you won't make that choice hastily to get a butt in the seat, for lack of a better term.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, and so I'm being sensitive to not, giving you a charge, but I'd really love to see that all the creative other options out there are explored before we commit to a full-time person.
And I'm really glad that we're having this discussion, because I am an advocate of computing science. I just want to make sure we do it right. Another area that we still need to move forward on, and in all fairness, there's only so many hours in the day, but I don't want to replicate high-tech high, but I think we can learn some very valuable lessons from high-tech high and other schools in Massachusetts that are moving more toward project-based learning. And the days of the singleton courses are ending. If you follow what's happening, and you do, in higher education, you're hearing this conversation more and more in terms of we need to get out of our silos and start creating interdisciplinary courses to make sure that our kids have the skill sets to be successful. And high school is no different as we take a look at this. So this has been a great conversation. It's helped me immensely that we're having this conversation.
Can I, just a follow-up question? Not a follow-up question, just something, I guess, to think about. I'd love to know what other districts, I'm sure that this will be part of the conversation, what are other districts doing as they struggle with the, competitive salary problem? Like, are other people finding the qualified people? Is it that Go VHS or these online models might be potentially more effective even?
It could certainly provide a lot more options, the diversity of options that Mike, the chairman, talked about, just the vast array of areas that kids might be interested in exploring. I think we have to give them really strong fundamentals for anything related to computer science and technical fields, strong science, strong mathematics, making sure that that's all shored up too. I've talked to the superintendent about that, making sure he's doing a good job there. And perhaps integrating or blending in some areas within mathematics or something if it would allow for it. We have a real prescribed curriculum for mathematics per the state and per the AP program, college board. But integrating somehow in there some coding and things like that. The superintendent and I talked last week about seeing what we could do for the 9th and 10th grade. We see that there's going to be a lot of options online for students in the 11th and 12th grade, either with local partnerships with businesses where they could be an intern in the actual field and really learn from a mentor
Right.
and have the practical application. That's in line with our Most Likely to Succeed initiative. We'll be talking a lot about that related to the book and the documentary, getting kids in fields where they can learn from a practitioner. And that's real. They're going to end up, might evolve into something else, references for college or connections for employment. So we want to see that piece. But I do see that there would be a need to provide some more, some type of fundamental offering with coding or exploratory option for 9th and 10th grade perhaps in the future. But I think what I'm hearing the charge from the committee and perhaps from the superintendent is to really design something, have a presentation perhaps that or have something we could bring forward. We'll need a little time, but really design a thoughtful program with being informed by people in the field, informed by higher ed, what are they looking for students who might be going into those fields, and along with neighboring schools who have established programs, what have they learned through their experience? And I think coming up with a thoughtful presentation to bring forward to the superintendent and then eventually to the school committee is probably the way to go. So we're designing something and then we provide the resources to make it happen. And what the traditional way is this way, is to come forward to a superintendent and ask for a teacher. But what I'm hearing is something that is more innovative and a better approach. So I appreciate the comments, and I'm going to take it to heart and get to work on it as soon as I can free up some time.
That's relative to the positions that I had questions for. Now the rest of it is when we get to the rest of the budget discussions.
Yeah, so-
Some general comments?
Yeah, so again, just want to thank Mike and Matt for taking on this task. I know how big of a deal it is, and it's a ton of being happening behind the scenes, so I'm very appreciative of that. Very appreciative to the administrative team for all those list of accomplishments. It makes it a lot easier for people like us to come forward and ask for this kind of investment from the town when we can point to really clear, evidence of the results that we get for that. Concern, again, the fourth budget that I've raised this concern about use of school choice funds. I know it's something we're all sensitive to, making sure that we have the right balance of a reserve, but being able to spend on the things that we need to. I'm going to reiterate that concern again because we've gotten presentations. We had a presentation a couple months ago about the potential for increased class sizes, and I have a real I don't want, my legacy to be with the school system that we look back on this and it led to the point that we're becoming so dependent on revolving funds that it became problematic later on. So it's really important to me that I'm very sensitive to this concern. It makes me very concerned about the notion of spending, a sort of an unwritten rule that I've had for my own mind is about spending more than we're taking in that fund. And so I appreciate that the two of you put together some scenarios that we can debate, and I can just say that at the beginning, I'm initially not comfortable with spending so much from that school choice fund. I am open to the idea of leaving some. I think that given that there's some unanswered question about the computer choice position and things like that, I think I feel comfortable probably allocating some use of that funds conditioned upon finding the right people and that it's the right timing for the schools. But I'm gonna just state it again about my concern about spending into the school choice fund if a couple years from now those seats were not allowed to keep open. Otherwise, I think it's again a testament that we're coming in pretty well below the state average, and that we're being able to tick so many things off of our list, like fulfilling another year of the full day kindergarten implementation. That's the next point that I want to make here. I want to make sure, it's really important to me that this 5-year plan is implemented on time. So want to entertain the idea of, if we're willing to spend school choice funds or whatever, if there ends up being wiggle room in there, I think it's really important that the full day kindergarten does not be something that we do cut, because we're only talking about the second year of the 5-year plan. So I'm going to throw my weight behind that as well.
I would concur with Mike on we're committed as far as the full day kindergarten goes, and I think that's something we have to see through. The one thing I'll say is that the 3 positions we're looking at, I tend to look at, I don't think they're wants. I think those are, in today's society, those are needs. And whether we can do it this year, I think it's something that we need to look at how we're going to fund these positions in the future.
Jen, any thoughts?
The only other thing I had was, we continue to talk about the increases in class size. Do we have any preliminary information about the next kindergarten class yet?
Not yet. We're watching that closely, and I'm anxious to see how many students are going into transition next year. And there are a lot of other questions I have, Jen, in terms of K in grade 1. I don't believe, knock on wood, that we're going to see the same class size as we did this year, but I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. This may be just a bubble year, so to speak. But it's something in the back of my mind that you rely on me, and rightly so, to make sure that budget works. And I'm not going to do anything that is going to put us in a bad spot. There's just no way. We work too hard to get where we are, and we need to be conservative. John and I have talked about English offerings. The class sizes in English offerings, a couple of classes are getting a little too large, or getting larger, not too large, getting larger, and we need to watch that. We need to reallocate somebody .2. So there's all these moving parts, and that's every year. I mean, it's not just this year. That's what I do, is try to keep track of all these moving parts and make them all work. So I want to make sure that if we have to do something unanticipated, that we can do it, rather than coming back and saying, well, we had our party, there's nothing left. And I just want to make sure that doesn't happen. So your conversations tonight are exactly in line with my thought process as well.
And I just want to amplify on that comment. It's a great question, because I've been thinking about the same thing. What happens if we do see another 140? Because then Shaker Lane is going to be over what their high's been over like the last 6 or 8 years. Right now, the distribution of growth across the buildings and grades is manageable in terms of space and staffing. We've hired some extra staff over the last couple of years as a direct response to what we're seeing. But if we now see that it starts to lump in where we're over 130 towards 140 in every class, in every building, that's where we're going to have to say that's going to require a significant effort by the community to figure out what we're going to do, because we can't turn them away. We're going to have to make it work. So I'm very curious to see what happens with that. Hopefully, that was a bubble, because we've seen that bubble before. We've seen it, the sophomore class is a bubble. There is the current 7th grade class is 132. That's not the next highest one. So when we say a bubble, we massage it through the buildings and through the grades, and we're okay. We can manage it, we make it work, we reallocate the resources that we've done. But if it's 1 grade in each building, okay. If it's 2 grades in every building, that's going to be a problem. If it's 2 grades in one building and 1 in every other, we might, you know what I mean? So I'm very curious to see that presentation that we looked at, that I'm going to do again for the planning board in 2 weeks. It's interesting to see, are the demographic trends going to skew the way they say they are, even in a community like ours, which right now seems like it's an attractive community to live in and raise your kids in. That's going to go a long way towards determining exactly what kind of pressures are, are we able to, Dr. Clenchey used the term sustainability of the budget. I appreciate him from an administrative perspective recognizing that, because it's something that we think about. I'm going to advocate for a particular course of action in a few moments, but it's based on what I feel is sustainability. I think it's okay for the next 2 to 5 years, and we'll see. But it's with that caveat that we got to keep an eye on that and see what the impact is.
To go back to a few meetings ago, maybe it was when you gave the presentation, like, let's figure out what those points are, when we need to decide to make some changes. So let's plan for that now.
Right.
Let's not forget. Yep.
So, I guess, I've been thinking about, how we put the budget together, and was just listening to parts of the different detail, and maybe I'm going to provide, I know that offline you mentioned it might be just a paperwork exercise in terms of what we're calling where there, but I guess I'd like to maybe put a couple policy-oriented thoughts in pieces here. Part of me wants to make sure and move all of our budgeted salaries into the appropriated budget and not do salary out of school choice. When I was listening to parts of the presentation here, I heard, we have some sped reserve in the appropriation there, that I think you had like $125,000. That's a reserve account within our appropriation. Perhaps we should be using our school choice funds for that reserve there. That opens up $125K to move into of our salaries there. Because I want to set the expectation that this is a required services. We shouldn't be having in our contingency fund required staff positions if it's required for delivering our service. That way, if the school choice funds disappear, it's not the educators that are at risk there. It's some of the other services that we're offering there. Some of the, I think also there's an opportunity to put more of our fee contingency pieces, the bus contingency funds out in the school choice line rather than in the appropriated budget. Then again, if we start running into tightness that the school choice funds are not available or decrease, it's pretty transparent to the community of what the pressure point's going to be. If we're subsidizing out of school choice $30,000 in bus fees, and there's no school choice money available, there's very few options for us for the community to know where that's got to come from, type of thing there. But if we start putting, as we have salaried positions there, I'm not comfortable that that's a required service, because if we required it, put it in our budget. I think that gives us another way of looking at it now is it gives us the ability to perhaps budget to our school choice number and then using the rest of the account as the reserves for those flex accounts there. So moving like the 125 sped reserve into school choice, and if we budgeted the 550 planned, and then the 125 of that was contingency on the other part there. If we don't use the contingency, we don't spend those extra school choice funds, but we didn't budget them per se either. It's a different way of looking at how we're managing the risk and where we're managing the risk in the budget there.
I totally agree with that.
I would maybe want somebody that's got a little bit more budget experience to vet that approach. But I'm just saying that might be a different way for us to be thinking about how we're looking at it.
I think it's a great suggestion.
Then-
I don't think it has a bottom line impact on what we're debating tonight.
No, but
But I agree. So like, I would say that like, we've looked at this annual salary offset of $250,000 year over year over year, which is fine. It works, it's functional. But I think what I'm hearing you say is, rather than have that say annual salary offset, that's gonna get moved right into the appropriated budget, and that's gonna say sped contingency.
Right.
For out-of-district tuition placement, something
Right.
along those lines. Which is, you're right, in some ways, it is a bit of a shell game, but when, if we do get to a situation where we're not going to be able to meet our obligations, because of funding restrictions, then now we're more clear about, well, we can get rid of that contingency and hope for the best, and it might work out, but we're gonna keep our staffing.
Right, or the town has to,
Right.
it's a heads up to the town,
Right.
we can't absorb the risk anymore.
Correct.
And I guess I'm leaning towards using monies within our appropriated budget for
Right.
those contingencies I don't think works in the long term for us.
And it sticks with the purpose of school choice and what we talked about, having this
Right.
reserve,
Yep.
which is
No, I
intended to
agree.
be.
Yeah, and then I think that gets me to a better position in terms of now I can have a clearer picture of what we're using the school choice for, and I could be more comfortable with is if we decide, for example, to put the computer science program in the school choice piece because we're going to develop it this year, with the expectation that once it gets developed and approved and hired against, it'll move into the regular course of studies, as opposed to trying to put that $65K into the budget, not knowing what we wanted to do with it. And you're right, at certain levels, it sounds like it's just moving the shells around there, but I think it just may
I agree.
eventually lead to a little bit more clarity
Yep.
and transparency in how we're presenting the budget and where we're taking the risk there. And then I don't think any of us have led off with where we see the comfort level with that line at this point is. So given that I still have the floor, I'll keep talking for a minute. Well, because it brings into how much should we hold in reserves?
Right.
You know, so I jotted some numbers here. So when I first came on the board, I think we were typically holding between 400 to 500K in reserves there. I think if I did the math back correctly there, that was probably about 2.5% of our budget. The 1 point whatever we have right now represents more than 5% of our budget. So what's the sweet spot? Is it a 4% contingency we should hold, a 5% contingency, a 3% contingency, you know, in terms of a working reserve there? I don't know if there's any rule of thumb for that. I think historically, we've seen unexpected sped expenses up to like 400,000 hit us in 1 year, type of thing there. So obviously, we don't want to get too close to that number. So that still puts us at 600,000, which is a 3% reserve. So I get comfortable saying, you know, is the number 4%? I'm just going to throw a number out. It's not vetted or anything. That brings us that, you know, we should hold 900,000 approximately in reserve of school choice for the budgeting purposes. And I guess, you know, short of any other process right now, and maybe that's something we ought to discuss more with the selectmen and the finance committee, is what should we target for that percentage of our budget there. You know, I'm leaning towards, you know, being able to go somewhere between 900 and 930 being left in our school choice account for pushing the budget forward for this year. And I'll just throw that out there as,
Okay.
and what my rationale and back that was.
I think, I like your rationale there. I personally feel, I like your methodology. My personal feeling is that I'd like to be a little bit more conservative with this year's school choice reserves because of the fact that if we want to make either an informal policy or have a longer-term discussion with the FinCom and selectmen about making a longer-term school policy on this, if let's say we decide we want to keep the 3% in perpetuity in that fund, at the rate that we rely upon it right now, my concern is that in future years, if we decide we want to keep the 3% or 4% or whatever it is, but we're not getting those school choice dollars coming in, it's going to be very difficult for us to maintain that budget. And so in these more positive years where we're looking about adding, my preference would be that we don't get so close to what our long-term goal is in reserves, if that makes sense. Because I know that, you know, whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, it'll be difficult for us to wean off of that quickly. So I appreciate that you're attacking that issue at one end, Daryl, which is to move in some of those, you know, operating cost type things out of the usage of school choice. So I'd like to, you know, my opinion is I had come in here today hoping to stay as close to the 550 number as possible, keeping what we're spending this year close to what we're bringing in, which brings us a little bit north of what you said, Daryl, about 900. I was looking at this the 1,053,000, but I don't want to be unnecessarily obtuse about these, like, specific, you know, these, you know, splitting, you know, hair as far as these pennies go, but.
Yeah, thoughts about that?
I'm leaning more towards Daryl, as far as I think Daryl's pretty right on. As far as, I want to be conservative also, but to me, I feel like we need to get some of these positions into place. I think we're still adding positions from the last time we cut, and I don't think we've ever gotten back to that point. So, you know, in the future, I think the bottom line is that FinCom and the selectmen need to get behind the full-day kindergarten, help us out there. And that would certainly help matters, but you know, I'm comfortable with being around 900 the 950 in the reserve funds.
So is that, if I'm hearing you correctly, then are you saying that you're, you would support the usage of the 670,000, so that would get us the proposed additional staffing, full-day kindergarten, sped, that offset, and salary offset?
Yeah, the only one that like I said, I agree with you on the computer science, but I think we need to fund the assistant principal at Shaker Lane and the STEM at Russell Street, and then contingent on what we come up with for the computer science.
Because I think if we do the 670, Mike, maybe you've already calculated, so somewhere in between, what's that?
I think that's the 930.
930?
Yeah.
Okay. So something that I would say, and I don't know what everyone else's reactions to it is, I think that what would make me feel a little bit more comfortable is something, I think we've already heard of commitments from the administration, which is that I assume that the 670,000 would be like our allocation of an upper maximum, the ceiling here, but that your goal would be to, what I'm thinking is if we end up landing in a different place than we're anticipating with the computer science program, maybe it ends up costing us a little less? Doesn't frequently happen, but
You can
maybe.
use the up to caveat when
So-
in a motion, so that gives direction to the superintendent about what
And that is what
the upper limit is,
Essentially,
but
I
if
would
they're
say.
able to, whether through any number of circumstances.
Efficiencies throughout the
Exactly,
year.
or just wasn't the right timing to hire this particular position, or we're gonna wait on it, then they don't use it all.
Right.
And what we're really telling them is, these are our priorities that have been identified. If you can act on them, terrific. If you can't, then we don't expect you to go find something else to do with the money, because this is, we're asking you to be judicious about the use of a revolving account.
Right.
And
And so I think knowing that that's the commitment from the team, it's not a stretch for me to make it to spending the 670,000, as long as, if it's not the right time for the, we think that the next year we're going to be able to really smash this computer science program, out of the park, then we wait till then and we get closer to where I want to land.
I guess maybe to sorry if you were going to jump in, Jen, there's so many numbers on the sheet.
I know.
I want to make sure,
Minutes,
so this one where we look at spending 625, maybe as a compromise between the two, as an upper bound, because I think we need the presentation back from you on what your computer science program would look like on it. And then I don't know if you have enough flexibility to at least initiate under that.
I would. I really, in terms of the computing science position, I want to make, I'm going to say it again, I want to make sure our ducks are in order until we move forward. And I also have that kindergarten class to be thinking about.
Yeah.
And that could be a game changer for some of this, because it's not just one FTE anymore. It's probably 1.2 because of the electives and prep time, et cetera. So I think we're going to be okay, but I'm conservative and cautious. I feel very comfortable operating within those limitations.
Within 625. And I guess, Kelly, I want to make sure, I'm not directing a computer science hire. I'm asking for a presentation on a computer science program there, and we can separately figure out the funding for that as appropriate. And then the delta there gives you, I think, does that give you enough flexibility for contingency for kindergarten, for initiating execution, if that's where the priorities, the education priorities need to happen?
Just math in my mind here.
Yeah. It's a lot of real time
I can
there.
make that work.
If I could just add, Superintendent, I like the way you're thinking, because it does allow us to be thoughtful in our approach to developing a program that would maybe eventually include a physical teacher in the building, presiding over the program, facilitating.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
And actively teaching and engaging students in person, eventually. But the other thing that helped us a lot this year was the additional funding from the superintendent, freeing up some cash with Steve for additional virtual high school seats and other online providers we were able to go beyond, outside of that, and there's a lot of competition in this field, and some of it costs money, and so, whether it's, there's not just free courses that you can get through Coursera for a small fee or something like that, or Harvard edX, but if we had $500 to $1,000 for a seat to provide students, particularly the kids who are advanced learners, who need that AP computer science, who really want to have it on their transcript because they're going into it and they want to have that course out of the way. We do have those students, and they're looking for that. And but AP courses come with additional fees at times. And there's a lot of competition in that field, there's a lot of different providers. We could give the students opportunity to pick the one they want rather than just go to one vendor. So I think this option allows us to support students as we go through this year of development. So thank you.
Yeah. And I'm trying to follow your conversation.
Yep.
I like what you're saying. I just want to make sure that whatever we do is consistent and equitable across the board. I don't think I'm missing some details. I don't expect them now.
But you could also do the exploratory course too. I just meant for the kids who go, sometimes we get concerns from parents of seniors who have 1 year left and need a particular course, or juniors, as they're building the transcript for their college application. Of course, the funding would potentially allow us to provide introductory courses too for 9th and 10th graders. But I just wanted to advocate for kids who say, oh geez, I'm not going to get a computer science teacher in my junior and senior year, and what does that do for my future aspirations or college application? I want to just speak to that to offer some reassurance that we'll do our best to take care of them.
That actually clears up
Okay.
my question, so, yeah. And, I mean, we have in the past, when we had that partnership with UMass Lowell that kind of fizzled on us, hopefully we can get it back, we had allocated some funds to make that program work. So, I mean, we want to make sure that we meet the needs of all of our students, and I think we've done an excellent job, and we don't want to stop doing that. We just want to make sure that we're cautious as we move into these new ventures to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success. So,
Any thoughts or comments on the usage level?
No, but I think if there are positions we need to hire for and we can find the right candidates this year, I would hate to not fund the position and not be able to hire that person, so.
I mean, I'm sensing a consensus, so I'm not going to argue too vociferously against it. I would caution this, though. The idea, you're right historically, all your historical aspect was right. And what we typically think about for that reserve for is unexpected expenditures in a given year, typically spent, but it can be other things, as Kelly alluded to much earlier this evening. Could be capital costs on equipment or something along those lines, or unexpected. We didn't have to shovel the roof off this year. That was a few years ago. We were close this year, but we didn't have to do it. But those types of things. But the other thing that maybe we don't talk about quite as often, but is something that I want to bring up, is that if we build up that reserve, it acts as a potential parachute. So that if we do reach a critical juncture in terms of the state continues to level fund local aid, our new growth revenue dries up in town, and as a town, we're facing very difficult decisions, then having a little bit bigger reserve in there, we can support for a longer period of time the level we've got to. And if we spend more of it now, then we are shrinking that horizon. And that day of reckoning will arrive sooner, where we might actually be in a position we were in a few years ago, where we actually have to start cutting back on either services and or staff. And I just kind of throw that out there. Coming into tonight, was thinking, well, and Mike had said this, let's not spend more than we take in. It's $550, it's a good number. It gives some flexibility to the superintendent to get some of this done. If he's able to, find some other efficiencies, he might get more of it done than we initially thought. But it allows us, if we stay up over around that $1 million mark, and it leaves us a significant amount of room so that we can, give ourselves the opportunity to reach the ground at a slower momentum than we otherwise might. Having said that, I'm okay with going, down below $1 million towards that 978. We're talking about, it's about $120,000 difference. you know, it's not insignificant, but we certainly have enough. And the 978 is perfectly reasonable in terms of a reserve for a year-by-year basis to meet unexpected costs. I have no question about that. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm just thinking about, like, if we do get bigger classes and we're struggling, what do we do?
Yeah.
So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from there, Mike. And at the same time, I also just want to make sure we're not starving our system for.
I get it. And again,
for,
it wouldn't shock me that if we did say 625 and our projection remaining balance was 978, it wouldn't shock me if we're in October next year, we're sitting down and it goes, hey, we're at $1 million in there because this, and this happened.
Right.
And we were able to stay at $1 million.
We're up from where we projected last year.
We are,
So
exactly.
You know,
Exactly. So like I say, I'm not going to object too vociferously. I just wanted to throw that out there.
And we're, at this point in time, we're trying to keep our school choice numbers stabilized. We're not looking to increase school choice. And I think that's an important point to make. If we can stabilize those numbers for the next 4 or 5 years, then we have an amount of money coming in that we can depend on. And, unless something happens that's unforeseen, we should be able to do that.
And I want to just throw that out there and make sure everybody understands, and even for myself, we simply can't tell students that are school choiced in here to leave.
That's correct.
Once they're in, we've committed to them till they graduate.
Right.
Our only alternative, our only option is to not renew seats as we lose students to graduation or anything else. We don't have to replace those seats. So we would never see ourselves going from, 500,000 to 0 in a year. It would be a gradual 6, 7, 8, 9 students at a time, I think is the average we have in particular classes. And as we drive down over, and it would be over a period of years. It would be,
Right.
If we stopped today, it would take us 12 years to lose all of our school choice students. So just something to keep in mind of the way how that mechanism functions. Any other discussion? We're ready, we'll entertain a motion.
So I get the sense, so when I make the motion that the school choice expenditures up to 625 is.
I feel comfortable with that.
Right. Move that the school committee vote to support an increase of $898,300 for the total appropriated budget for FY19 of $19,774,190, and also to authorize the superintendent to budget up to $625,000 of school choice funding for the FY 2019 school department budget.
Second.
Motion made, second. Before we vote on that, I would have done this sooner, but there's really no reason I'm going to do it as a pro forma. Is there any community input? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. If we had community input, people would have been jumping out of their chair. I would have let them come up here before we made the motion. Just want to make sure. We had a lot of that last year. It was very good. We were very happy to have it, but this year things were a little less attended. All right, a motion is made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right, thank you. All right, that closes our public hearing on the budget. Thank you, everyone. We do have a couple of other pieces of business to transact because we lost a meeting a couple of weeks ago. Just quickly. All right, Kelly, we have the draft calendar for 2019-19.
And I'm going to ask Dr. Schcmte to walk you through that. Thank you.
I'm happy to do that, and if I can get this microphone. Actually, a lot of people who are sitting here were involved in this process, including the LEA president. We've gotten a pretty good protocol or procedure established for getting input and voices into setting forth the days on the calendar. And it's important to know they just don't plop there. There's a number of calendar issues that have come before the school committee. You've been asked questions about the scheduling of early release days. You've been asked about scheduling of parent conferences. We work with the principals to set forth the time period for the marking periods, and the times for the early release professional development. And all of these go into a number of half-days. At the end of the time, after we meet with the administrative council, we asked to meet with representatives from the LEA. And this year, we met with Ms. Packer, representing the elementary level, and Mrs. Derry, representing the secondary level. And their input was, was important, and it ended up having a change and in the draft calendar that we put forth to you. Since members of this school committee have been here, we have instituted the second page of the calendar where the dates are listed. And there are a number of groupings of dates, including religious holidays, that are listed. There are some things that are not listed on this calendar that you should know we take into consideration in putting forth this school calendar. This year's school calendar was really a mirror of last year's, and I want to point out that the early release that's in May, May 24th, is in red. That's a Friday. That is the only early release session for professional development that is not on a Wednesday, and we mirrored that with last year's experience because we're concerned about conflicts with the 10th grade MCAS testing schedule. And it is usually in the end of May, and we were concerned about conflicts. October is a big month in schools. You have the you have the initial start of the school year in September. You have back-to-school nights, parent curriculum nights, and October is when you have a lot of initiatives that begin to, year-long initiatives that begin to kick into gear. We also have some big-time conferences. We made a number of changes in the October school calendar for this year. We have 30 staff members that attend the MassQ conference in technology, and that is usually the third week in October. And in the past, we have had conflicts with principals and staff going to MassQ for 2 days, and our October professional development early release. So we moved the October professional development early release to the 17th in order to avoid that conflict. We then met with the LEA reps, and they talked about how technology is, and attending that MassQ is very important to middle school staff. And the middle school staff who are attending, this came out in the meeting with the LEA representatives, they have to balance attending the conference in Foxborough at Patriots Stadium, and is it called Patriots Stadium, or is it called Gillette Stadium? Okay, yeah, there, it's big, and so, with scheduling conferences for parents. So we brought that feedback back to Principal Temple, and she moved the middle school student conferences to earlier in the week. So that, it's an important month. It's got a lot of important initiatives into it, and so I will tell you, those were the two changes we made for this year. Other than that, it is a mirror of last year. We are honoring the religious holidays that are part of contract, and I welcome any questions you have, but I will emphasize for the parents and community members who are viewing that there's a lot of input. Principals work very hard to put forth dates ahead of time. plan marking periods, and they also gather input from staff, and then we also gathered input from the LEA. So we do think that there's a lot of voices here.
I appreciate you, and I think this is the first time we really had a somewhat detailed breakdown of the process that goes into it. I appreciate you providing that, because I think it's important for people to understand that everything you just said means that the calendar is based on educational outcomes and going to school, not on what's the best time to get a flight to go to one particular place or another. I'm quickly looking at this, so we're going to start school, we're going to be 11 weeks before the Thanksgiving break, 4 weeks, and then we get the winter break, 7 weeks from the end of winter break to February break, 7 weeks from the end of the February break to the April break, and 8 to 9 weeks from April to the end of school. I think that's a pretty even breakdown of going there, and I hope that the community keeps in mind that all the things you just said, that there's a reason why there's this Friday is a full day off for the staff to do something, and it's this time of year instead of that time of year. It's because it was important from an educational perspective to do it that way, and there can still be some mumbling and grumbling, but that's why we do it. Now, we're not trying to pick what the best day for these guys to have a day off is. That's not how it works. So, thank you. Any other comments or questions on the calendar? All right, we will entertain a motion to approve this.
Make a motion to approve the 2018-19 school calendar as presented.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None.
Excellent, thank you. And just for your information, we have assembled, excuse me, a blizzard bag committee, and we are hoping to come back with some sort of proposal prior to the end of June. It will have to be approved by the state once it's approved by the school committee. But we are embarking upon a very thoughtful journey, as you can see from the second last snow day where there were power outages. That really does play havoc with the blizzard bag plan, especially with technology. So, you know, that really kind of helped us hone some of our discussions as we try to move forward with this. So, thank you. The last calendar is the school committee calendar. Very similar pattern to this year. And if there are no questions, I would ask that you also entertain a motion to move forward with the calendar.
Any questions?
Make a motion to approve the school committee meeting calendar as presented.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right.
Do
I
it.
think that does it. Back here on April 5th. That's 2 weeks, right? All right.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. We don't need an executive session because
We
we're
don't.
all settled with the LEA. Motion made, second? Was it seconded?
Second.
Motion made, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.